They called it kindness. I called it a sentence. While the children of the house unwrapped gifts and laughed at the table, I was ordered to scrub floors, invisible, unwanted, a shadow in the place I was told to call home. Every smile they gave each other was a reminder that I didn't belong, and every cruel word carved deeper into me the belief that I was nothing. My name is Logan Price, and for 30 years, I lived as if I didn't matter. The church was packed, every pew overflowing with neighbors dressed in black, their heads bowed as the pastor spoke of Walter Price with reverence. They called him a pillar of the community, a man of faith, a father who had opened his doors to a child who needed saving. Each word echoed through the chapel like a hammer striking against my ribs. I stayed in the shadows at the farthest row, close enough to hear every praise but distant enough that no one dared to look my way. Their voices rose together in hymn, a gentle swell of devotion, candles flickering in soft halos of light. To anyone else, it might have felt warm, comforting, even holy. To me, it was a chill that sank deep into my bones. The more they lifted Walter up as a saint, the more I felt the weight of what I had endured beneath his roof. They spoke of generosity, but I could still feel the sting of hunger in my stomach from nights when scraps were all I was given. They spoke of compassion, but my back remembered the ache of labor before sunrise. My hands the calluses that came before childhood should have ended. Around me, people wept, wiping tears from their cheeks, clutching tissues as though they'd lost a hero. My eyes stayed dry, my chest felt heavy. Yes, but not with grief. It was something closer to anger, and beneath that, a loneliness so sharp it left me hollow. And then I saw him, near the doorway, away from the crowd, stood a man in a charcoal suit that didn't belong in this small-town church. He wasn't listening to the sermon, wasn't watching the casket. He was staring at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide, trembling as though he'd just seen a ghost. When the service ended and the crowd began their slow procession toward the cemetery, I slipped outside and stayed behind, unwilling to follow the family that had always treated me as an intruder. I leaned against the cold stone wall, grateful for the quiet after the endless chorus of praise for a man I could never mourn. That was when the stranger approached me. He carried himself differently from the others, sharper, more deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on mine as though measuring the ground between us. "My name is Daniel Brooks," he said, voice low but steady. "I'm a private investigator." I frowned, ready to brush him off, but then came the words that split the air like glass shattering. "Christopher Hale." My chest tightened. "You've got the wrong man. My name is Logan Price." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into a leather folder and unfolded a brittle newspaper clipping, its edges yellowed with time. I froze when I saw it. A grainy photo of a 5-year-old boy under the headline, "Missing from New York." 1993. The boy's wide eyes and solemn mouth were unmistakably mine. Daniel's gaze softened, though his hands trembled slightly as he held the page open. "You're not who they told you you were. You weren't adopted out of kindness. You were taken." The ground seemed to tilt beneath me, the hymn still echoing faintly from the church, now sounding distant, hollow. Then Daniel added one final blow. Walter Price worked on a construction site in New York the same summer that Child disappeared. He left suddenly, moved here with unexplained money, and brought you with him? Connect the dots? I couldn't breathe. The man they buried with hymns and glory wasn't my savior. He was my captor. The walk to the cemetery blurred around me, voices and footsteps muffled as if underwater. My pulse hammered in my ears. My thoughts tangled between disbelief and the undeniable evidence I had just seen. Fragments began to surface, sharp and vivid. A woman's voice, soft and lilting, whispering, "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." A wooden toy clutched in small hands, polished smooth from touch. The glow of a bedroom lamp spilling golden light across walls painted with color. These weren't memories from Kansas, not from the Price household with its damp basement and locked doors. They were pieces of another life, one I had been told never existed. Daniel stayed close but gave me space, his tone quieter now, almost careful. You were never unwanted. You were never abandoned. You were stolen. The words twisted inside me. Anger surged, then confusion, then a hollow ache so deep I thought it might split me open. Daniel pressed on, his eyes steady. The police report from that year was signed by the town's sheriff, Robert Henley. He just happened to be Marjorie Price's cousin. He was the one who stamped the papers that made everything look legitimate. My legs weakened, and I steadied myself against the iron fence bordering the cemetery. The procession was gathering by the open grave, voices rising in prayer. I couldn't look at them. All I could hear was Daniel's voice and the question it left echoing in my skull. If my entire life had been built on lies, then who was I? Really? Back in my small apartment? The quiet felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves knew what had been said at the funeral. I had barely set my keys down when there was a knock at the door. Marjorie stood in the hallway, her black dress still perfectly pressed, her expression stretched into something meant to resemble a smile. Without waiting for an invitation, she announced that she'd made dinner and wanted me to come. It was the first time in my life she had ever used the word invite. The dining room looked like a photograph torn from a magazine. A place had been set for me at the table, a real place, not a tray in the kitchen. Steam rose from dishes I'd only dreamed of as a boy. Roast beef, fresh rolls, sweet corn dripping with butter. Marjorie moved around the table with rehearsed cheer, her tone syrupy, her eyes flicking to me with a strange tightness. My stomach turned. This wasn't a meal, it was theater. The chairs, the food, the smiles were all props in a show she hadn't rehearsed well enough to hide her fear. When I pushed back my chair to leave, she leaned close, the sweetness gone from her voice. "There are things you shouldn't dig up," she whispered. "Some secrets are better buried for everyone's sake." The words dropped like stones into the room. In that instant, I understood. This wasn't an olive branch. It was panic disguised as kindness. What she feared wasn't losing me. It was losing control of the story she'd built for 3 decades. Daniel called later that night. His voice was brisk, urgent. We needed to act before anyone destroyed proof. I met him 2 days later at a rundown motel on the edge of town. Inside, the tiny room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Laptops open, boxes of files stacked on the bed, photographs spread across a table. He swabbed my cheek for DNA while I scanned images of a boy with my own eyes staring back. The following days blurred. By daylight, I worked and smiled for customers. By night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every creak of the floorboards sounding like someone coming for me. A friend from my past stopped me at the hardware store and said he remembered hearing Walter hissing at Marjorie years ago. "If anyone finds out the truth about that boy, we lose everything." The confession hit me like a blade. Then, as if to confirm my worst fears, Marjorie appeared at my workplace, a place she had never once stepped foot in. She handed me a cup of coffee she knew I wouldn't drink and said quietly, "It would be a shame if some old papers were to disappear. You understand, don't you?" Her eyes were cold, the warning unmistakable. I realized she was already moving to erase the past. If we didn't move faster, the proof of who I was would vanish along with it. I sat alone in my cramped apartment, the dim hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My phone buzzed, and when I saw Daniel's name flash across the screen, my pulse quickened so hard it almost hurt. I answered with a shaky breath. "Logan," he said, his voice measured but heavy. "The DNA results are back. 99.9%. You're a match with Eleanor Hale." The room tilted, my grip faltered, and the phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the table. For a moment, all I could do was stare at it, the words still echoing. I wasn't just some unlucky boy who had been mistreated. I was the stolen son of one of New York's wealthiest families. Daniel's next words cut even deeper. "Your father, Richard Hale, he passed away a few years ago." My chest caved. The air felt thin. I had lost more than my childhood. I had lost the chance to ever look my father in the eye, to hear his voice call me son. That was gone forever. Then Daniel added softly, "But your mother, Eleanor, is still alive. She never stopped searching. She kept your bedroom the same all these years, waiting for you to come home." Tears blurred my vision as a fragile thread of hope tangled with the grief. My whole life had been stolen, yet somewhere, someone had never stopped loving me. Daniel arranged a meeting with federal agents later that week. Sitting across from them, I felt the weight of every eye studying me, as though I were both evidence and victim. They laid folders on the table, each one filled with pieces of a puzzle I'd lived but never understood. The first file revealed a large cash deposit Walter received in 1993, just weeks after I had vanished. That money became the down payment for the ranch in Kansas. My stomach churned at the thought. I had mucked stalls and mended fences on land, bought with the price of my own disappearance. Then came the second blow. An archived report from the sheriff's office bore signs of forgery. The signature at the bottom belonged to Robert Henley, the town's sheriff at the time, and Marjorie's cousin. He had buried the truth with his pen. One of the agents slid a laptop across the table. A video filled the screen, a boy in a tiny suit, blowing out 5 candles while his parents leaned close, their faces glowing with pride. The boy's laugh rang clear, pure, my laugh. The sight broke me. I pressed my hands to my face, sobbing for the childhood I remembered only in fragments. As if to match my despair, the agents delivered their warning. Marjorie had been making frantic calls to a lawyer, slipping in and out of the old records room at the ranch. If she destroys those files, one agent cautioned, it will be harder to prove the kidnapping. That night, I stared through my apartment window at the Kansas darkness. The wind howled outside, sharp and cold. There was no more running from this. The truth was coming, and it would demand that I stand in the middle of it. Dawn broke gray and cold. The quiet of the Kansas plains ruptured by the roar of engines. Black SUVs tore up the gravel road and skidded to a halt in front of the Price Ranch. Doors slammed open, agents in bulletproof vests swarming across the yard with weapons drawn. I stood back near the tree line, my pulse hammering so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Inside, Marjorie sat at the kitchen table as if none of it mattered, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup. When the agent stormed in and snapped handcuffs around her wrists, she lifted her chin with that same brittle smile she'd worn my whole life. "You have nothing," she sneered. "No proof." But proof was exactly what they carried. In the interrogation room, her silence held for a while, her eyes icy and her lips pressed tight. The agents moved carefully, stacking evidence in front of her, the DNA results, the sudden flood of cash in 1993, the falsified report signed by her cousin, the sheriff. Finally. They played the video of a boy's 5th birthday, my birthday, candles glowing as my real parents leaned in close. Her face cracked. The smile slipped. "Yes," she whispered, voice shaking. "That's Christopher Hale." And then the truth spilled out. Walter had snatched me for ransom, but when the case exploded across the nation, panic set in. He couldn't give me back. He couldn't ask for money. So they invented a story, an abandoned child, and raised me as their servant to hide their crime. I stood behind the one-way glass, watching the woman who ruled my childhood unravel. Every cruel word she'd ever spoken was now nothing but evidence sealing her fate. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he passed me the phone. I could see something in his eyes, a softness, almost reverence, that told me this moment mattered as much to him as it did to me. I pressed the device to my ear, my heart rattling against my ribs. "Christopher." The voice on the other end broke on the first syllable. It was fragile and breathless, carrying 30 years of longing in a single word. "Is it really you?" My throat tightened. For a second I couldn't speak. My whole life had been defined by silence, by being told I wasn't wanted, wasn't worthy, wasn't real. And yet here was a woman whose voice trembled because she had never stopped believing in me. My lips parted, and the words came out unsteady. "I've been called Logan Price my entire life. But, yes, I am Christopher." Her sobs filled the line, raw and uncontained. "Oh, my baby, my sweet boy. I've been waiting so long." I closed my eyes, letting her voice wash over me. She told me how she had kept my bedroom untouched for 3 decades, how every year on my birthday she baked a cake and lit candles in that empty room. "I never blew them out," she said. "I couldn't. To do that would be to surrender. And I never gave up hope, Christopher. Not once." Tears blurred my vision. All the lies I had been fed, how I was abandoned, how no one wanted me, crumbled under the weight of her truth. She hadn't let me go. She had fought for me every single day. Hours later, as the winter sun sank low over Kansas, I stood at the small regional airport watching a sleek jet taxi across the tarmac. My legs shook, my palms were damp. And then the cabin door opened, and she appeared. Eleanor Hale descended the steps slowly, cautious as if afraid that one wrong move might shatter the fragile dream she was about to touch. She was smaller than I'd imagined, her frame delicate, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes, sharp, bright, alive, were the same green as mine. They locked on me instantly, and I felt the years between us collapse. I couldn't wait another second. I ran. My body moved before my mind could catch up, and when I reached her, she dropped her bag and opened her arms. I fell into them like I'd been falling my entire life, and she caught me, holding on with a desperation that shook us both. "My son," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. So sorry I couldn't find you sooner." I clung to her, choking on my own tears. "You did find me," I whispered. "You never stopped." In that embrace, a sound rose unbidden in my memory, a lullaby, soft and steady. The same words I had heard in fragments my whole life. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." It hit me all at once. I hadn't lost that memory. It had been waiting for me, buried beneath years of cruelty and lies, waiting for her voice to bring it back to life. And in that instant, I knew. I was home. Months slipped by in a blur of change. I left Kansas behind and moved to New York, settling into an apartment not far from my mother. Each morning, I walked past skyscrapers that stretched like monuments of glass and steel, reminders of the empire my family had built. Yet, I didn't step into that empire as an heir demanding a crown. Instead, I enrolled in business classes, determined to learn, to earn the right to one day carry the Hale name with integrity. The fortune waiting for me was immense, but I wasn't ready to touch it. I didn't want wealth to define me, not after living a life where worth was measured in scraps of food and cast-off clothes. I came to understand something vital. Money can change a man's circumstances, but it cannot restore the years stolen from him. No inheritance could ever give me back my childhood. What healed me was not wealth, but truth, the knowledge that I had been wanted all along, and the love of a mother who had never let go. One cold afternoon, I returned to Kansas. The ranch that had once been my prison sat abandoned, padlocked and silent. Weeds choked the yard, shutters hung loose, windows shattered by the wind. I stood before the door to the basement where I had slept so many nights in the dark. Now it was just a hollow shell, a place where the wind whistled through emptiness. I felt no hatred, no fire of revenge, only a strange gratitude. "Thank you, Logan Price," I whispered. "You endured, and because you survived, Christopher Hale lived to come home." With that, I turned away from the ruins of my past. Ahead, the horizon glowed with the pulse of New York City, alive with promise. The story of my life had been twisted by lies, but the ending was mine to claim. The truth had surfaced, unyielding. Love had survived the long winter of separation. And, as I walked toward the light of my new future, one truth rang louder than all the rest. The truth can never stay buried, and love never dies.